I know you're trying to be. Oh, hell no.
Look at the stage. There's no recording, but so you can like escape today and like, you know, find solace in the fact that you're not going to find yourself on YouTube, you know, with this like major anti-feed.
I didn't even view him. I don't even have firms on this account. That's crazy.
I think he muted himself. I should not be doing this right now.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Anyways, yeah, I mean, look, I'll speak to anybody on the panel right now. They have like a disagreement with anything.
I guess we can talk about abortion ethics. Do you have any positions in abortion ethics?
I'm like largely pro-life, but like I don't really think I'm pro-life for the reasons you're pro-life.
Okay, what are the reasons? What are the reasons why you're pro-life?
I just take like a flow account, and I think that the fetus is relatively identical to the adult, and so the more value persists or is sustained.
Okay, and by relatively identical to the adult, what do you mean there?
Like, you want like the syntax, or like I'm not sure. Do you know what relative identity is, like independent of the discussion?
Yeah, I'm just asking in a sense the term when you say it's relatively identical to the adult.
Perhaps like they're the same organism, but like different, I guess, stages of development or something.
Okay, so in virtue of what are they the same organism?
They have the same unique genetic code, the same origin by virtue of their unique genetic code.
Okay, so you take the view that the reason why they're morally valuable entities is in virtue of the fact that they're relatively identical to their future selves, and that they're the same organism in virtue of the fact that they have the same genome. That's the view that you take?
Look, they're morally valuable entities. Or when I say morally valuable, I just mean that they, you know, have these sorts of moral rights. Insofar as they have like a future like ours. Like the reason why this future like ours would extend to like the sperm or the egg, it's just because the sperm and the egg, or the egg, sorry, do not stand in a relative identity relation with the adult organism, the fetus does.
Why is the sperm alone not relatively identical to the future person?
It just doesn't possess the same genetic code. It possesses half of the DNA.
Okay, so you take it that you need a full genome set in order for you to have the future like ours?
You'd have to have possessed it. That would be like your origin. Like the organism would develop from this unique genome. And that would be what, you know, gives you the relative identity relation.
Okay, so in a world where humans had a different genome, would they still have a future like ours?
Yeah, because the future like ours itself isn't grounded in the genome that the human has.
Okay, so what is it grounded in precisely?
Like the capacity to have future experiences that we consider to be valuable.
And by capacity, you mean?
The potential to have these things.
Is it an active or a passive sense of potential?
I don't use the Aristotelian terms at all.
Okay, well, what's meant by potential there?
It's something that's physically possible.
Something that's physically possible. So to say that a fetus has a capacity to develop conscious experiences in the future is just to say that it's physically possible for the fetus to do that?
Yeah, like given its DNA and stuff, like it will develop these things.
Okay, so how are you getting from the descriptive facts about its genome set or any other of those facts, and how are you establishing the normative facts?
The normative facts, as in like...
Yeah.
When you say the normative facts, what exactly do you mean?
I'm just using it in the same way that most philosophers use it.
As in like, you know, you ought not abort the fetus?
Yeah, you can think about ought as a normative operator.
Yeah, I don't use propositional normative facts. I mean, I just don't understand the question.
You don't use propositional normative facts. So when you talk about morality, what is the sort of semantics that you use?
I'm a prescriptivist, so...
And what are prescriptive facts?
You said what?
What are prescriptive facts on your view? Like, what's the difference between prescriptive facts and normative facts?
I'm not even sure if it makes sense to say that there are prescriptive facts, right? Because like when I think of a fact, I think of something that's true, but prescriptions obviously are not of the category of things that can be true. So
You take it that prescriptions are non-propositional?
yeah, obviously.
What? Okay, so can you give me an example of a prescription?
Sit down, stand up, wiggle around.
Okay, so do you think the sentence "you should sit down" and the sentence "you shouldn't murder" are identical?
You should sit down and you shouldn't murder. When you say identical, what does that mean? Like identical in mood? They're both in the descriptive mood. So I mean, in that sense, yeah.
Identical in mood? Well, I don't know what you mean by mood.
You have like the imperative mood, the declarative mood, the interrogative mood. You should sit down and you shouldn't murder. Sorry, both seem to be in the declarative mood. So in that sense, perhaps they're identical. If that's
I'm
what
not
you're
asking if they're both declarative sentences. What I'm asking is if they're both identical in the sense that they're both prescriptive.
I don't think those sentences are prescriptive now.
That's the example of the sentence that you gave me when I asked you to give me an example of a prescriptive sentence. The example of the sentence that you gave me was sit down, wiggle, whatever.
Yeah, like those are commands. I think when you say like you should sit down, I don't think those are like inherently prescriptive. Maybe
Okay,
it's like
so
maybe it's like a secondary function that might be like, prescribing behavior in the sense that, the illocutionary act that the speaker's engaging in is like, prescribing a behavior to you or something, but the sentence itself is not prescriptive.
okay, so in virtue of what is the sentence not prescriptive?
It's just not in the imperative mood. At least under my semantics to be anything.
What is an imperative mood?
It's syntactic. Wait, hold on. I'll read out like the Wikipedia. It says, a grammatical mood that forms a command or request is used to demand or require that an action be performed. It's usually found only in the present tense, second person. They are sometimes called directives.
Okay, so in what sense is you should sit down not that?
It just doesn't take the same form, right? I don't think it's in.
So I don't understand why I would have to take the same form. So the thing that makes it prescriptive is just the form, the syntactic structure of the sentence, or is it prescriptive because? Oh, go ahead.
It just depends on what you mean by prescriptive there, because I already told you when I understand.
I'm just using it in the same sense that you're using it. I'm not employing any of my semantics in terms of your prescriptivist language. So anytime I reference the word prescriptive, I'm using it in the same sense that you are.
Okay, so like let me just make this clear. I mean, if by prescription you mean like I'm, giving or like trying to be action guiding, so I'm maybe saying, this is an action, that someone should do or something. Maybe in that sense it's prescriptive. But when I talk about prescriptions, I'm specifically speaking of these commands. Right, if I prescribe something,
yeah, I don't know how
command.
saying you should sit. Yeah, that's what I'm confused about. I don't know how saying you should sit down is not a command.
Because it's just not. I mean, look, it might be a command in the sense that
you don't think if I tell my kid he should sit down, I'm not commanding him to do something?
They're completely different semantic moods. I don't think if I say you should sit down, you're commanding, unless the illocutionary act of the agent that's giving the statement is that of prescribing or commanding. So maybe the agent.
You're saying if I say you should sit down, okay, I'm just gonna write down the things that you're saying is a command and what you're saying is not a command. So you should sit down. That's not a command, right?
You should sit down is not a command, no.
Okay, and what's the thing that's a command?
A command in like regular semantics is something like sit down, stand up, etc.
Okay, so why is the first one not a command and the second one is? Are you just going to say it's because of a syntactic structure? The first one doesn't take the form, the second one does?
It's syntactic and semantic, right? Like one does not have the form and one includes certain words that have different functions than another, right? I already agreed.
Sorry, do you take it that when you say command, are you talking about the intention of the agent or you're talking about the syntactic structure of the sentence?
Well, I was talking about the latter, the syntactic structure. But I already said if we're talking about like the illocutionary act of the agent, perhaps you can understand you should sit down to be a command insofar as the agent intends for it to be a command or something. But I don't think you should sit down.
So it's about intention as well.
I'm not factoring in intention when I describe things as imperatives, no.
No, I'm not asking. So when I say it's about intention, what I'm saying is that the fact that it is a command in some part is constituted by the agent's intention, but it also could be constituted by the mere syntactic structure of the sentence in your case, right?
No, I don't think it being a command is constituted by the agent's intention.
But you just said that you have a case where if the agent had an intention to express it as a command, then it would be a command.
No, I said you could understand it as one, right? Like in the sense that, like, for another example, maybe like, for example, I'm waiting for my friend to come outside, right? And I say something like, "Are you going to take forever?" Question mark. That's a question. Like, undoubtedly, indubitably is a question. But perhaps this is me trying to tell him to hurry up. So maybe in that sense, right, you could say, "Oh, when I say, are you going to hurry? Are you going to take forever?" Sorry, I'm giving you a command to hurry up or something. But like, semantically speaking, syntactically speaking, I take it as a question that I'm intending to express a desire for someone to hurry up with.
Can you tell me what a command is on your semantics?
It's just synonymous with an imperative. And I already gave like
an imperative. Okay, so I think the conventional use of the term command is basically just going to be a type of proposition that expresses an imperative. Now, of course, what's meant by imperative is usually a certain type of directedness or aboutness about the proposition that's being expressed. You agree with this, right?
May I repeat the definition?
You agree that in order for them to have an imperative, that there has to be a certain type of directedness about the expression of the particular proposition, right? You could say the proposition that's being linguistically expressed by the agent. That in order for them to do that, it must be the case that they're directing something about the proposition, right?
If by directedness you mean like it's referring to something, then yeah, presumably.
Okay, so in what sense does the sentence "you should sit down" not direct someone to do something by way of expression of proposition?
So if you understand "you should sit down" to be declarative, then it's describing, at least under my view, it's describing, right, the world as something, or it's describing reality as something. It's not giving a command, right? It has a mind to world direction of fit.
I don't
Right.
see any reason to believe that me saying you should sit down is merely just a description about a state of affairs. But rather, I take it to be that it's more closely aligned to a certain type of imperative where the agent is expressing a particular imperative, right? A statement that has a certain type of directedness about it. Ergo, you should move your legs and go sit down in the chair. Why would I believe that that's just merely an expression of a given state of affairs?
Yeah, because I think you can believe that you should do something and yet, not do it. But if I hold to an imperative or hold myself to an imperative, it'll be pretty weird for me to like not do the imperative. But maybe what you're saying is just like when you say you should sit down, like what you mean to say is sit down. If that's true, then like obviously like the meaning of you should sit down, if we're determining it based off the agent's intention, would just be sit down. I'm just telling you that on its own, imperatives are not propositions, and you should sit down takes the form of a proposition, not an imperative.
So do you understand? Okay, so I guess this might turn on like the certain type of speech act that's at play with, you could say, the linguistic tokens of the agent. But in the case where they express the sentence "you should sit down," I take it that they're doing something that directs something or someone to do some action, right? Or to, in some sense, basically motivate them in some way to follow that particular course of action, right? And I take those things to be a little bit distinct from, say, just mere assertions, right? Like, the sky is blue, for example. So I don't see any reason to believe that the first sentence, "you should sit down," is just merely a description about a given state of affairs.
Yeah, so I mean, all I'm saying, I'm just gonna say it one more time, is if when the agent utters "you should sit down," what they're doing is prescribing action, right? So they're telling you to do something. Not that you should do something, but they're saying do this thing, right? Under that view, right, you're just using the words incorrectly. You're saying "you should sit down" when in reality what you mean to say is sit down. But if when you say "you should sit down," you're not saying they mean the same thing. You're not saying "you should sit down" and "sit down" mean the same thing. If that's not what you're saying, then I'll just disagree with you that there is this action guiding, property to the sentence "you should sit down." Like in the same way, if I say like "you ought not murder," I think what you're doing there is you're describing the world as a world in which you oughtn't murder. I don't think anything you're saying there is saying to an agent, "Do not murder." Maybe that might be like an implication or something. but like I don't think that's what the sentence means, given like the terms we're piecing together.
Okay, I mean, we can just keep going back and forth about this state about whether or not the first sentence is in fact an imperative or not, but I think that's just going to be fruitless. Let's just go under the supposition that prescriptivist ethics is true, right? I guess the first question that I have for you is whether or not this view is non-cognitivist in nature.
Yeah, it is non-cognitivist because imperatives are non-propositional.
Okay, so you take it that moral statements, you take it that you're taking on a specific semantic thesis where moral sentences and judgments don't actually aim to represent how things actually are, or it's not the case that moral sentences aim to express propositions, rather they express imperatives. So I guess, how do you deal with the standard issues against non-cognitivism? Like, for example, the preponderance of psychological data that actually suggests the opposite of what your semantic thesis is predicting, and also the fact that you can't actually, there's an issue with basically explaining, or rather accounting for inferences in logically complex normative sentences. For example, like, it is wrong to torture babies for fun or something like this. So how do you deal with those two issues as a type of non-cognitivist?
Yeah, so like the two issues you represented were psychological data that seem to go against what I'm saying, as well as like the standard free gig each issues. I guess I'll just talk about the free gig each issues first because I think I have a more simple response to the psychological data. For the free gig each problems, I just don't think they have the same sort of force that they do when compared to like emotivists, right? So like maybe you might take a sentence like, you know, murder is wrong. And the prescriptivist might interpret this as like, you know, do not murder or something. And like if you have like a conditional that's like, if murder is wrong, then like paying somebody to murder is wrong. I might just interpret that as if I prescribe against murder, which is just to say like if this is something that I prescribe against, then I also prescribe against this thing as well. And that's just based on like R.M. Hare's universal prescriptivist view. He believes that prescriptions also apply in similar cases. And so if I prescribe against murder generally, then I also prescribe against paying somebody to murder someone because, well, those are relevantly similar cases.
I don't know if this really gets around the frigate Geach problem. You also, I don't know if you wanted to, I think you said you were going to respond to the psychological stuff, but maybe we can push that to the side for a second. I'm not really sure if that actually addresses the issue, because I take it that what the problem is basically in order for the expressivist to basically present a successful criterion, right? Or an adequate account of content in terms of basically these force-involving assertions or judgments, that you have to do so in a way that basically adequately accounts for, you could say, like folk semantic intentions, right? Whenever they express these propositions, or excuse me, well, I can't say express propositions, that would be question begging, but whenever they express these, you could say logically complex normative sentences, right? So it seems like what you were saying is that you just take it that they don't have this sort of force involving assertion, as we would like to put it. But even if that was the case, right, the issue for you, which I haven't really heard, is for you to specify a given inference, like, and how exactly it is the case that your view can actually account for the facts that those arguments have an inference, right?
Yeah,
that's what the issue is, which I'm not really hearing a response. If you did give a response, then maybe you can rephrase it in a different way.
I'll just repeat it like really quickly. So like the idea is like in the background of prescriptivist views, you have Hare's universal prescriptivism, right? That's the idea that when you give a prescription to yourself, that prescription also applies in relevantly similar circumstances in order to maintain consistency, right? Like internal consistency. And so like the idea is like we can represent a syllogism that takes the form, you know, if murder is wrong, then paying someone to murder is wrong. Murder is wrong, therefore paying someone to murder is wrong. As if I prescribe against murder, right, then then I also prescribe against paying someone to murder. And then I prescribe against murder, thus I also prescribe against paying someone to murder, right? So like there we've captured the inference, right? Because, well, we've represented it in a way where it's like pretty obvious how it follows, given you're trying to be consistent. And so, I mean, I'm not sure what the question is. Is the question like, actually, no, I'll let you try and respond. Maybe you've spotted something.
I guess if that is what the sort of response is, then it seems like there would be an equivocation with respect to the phrase. I don't remember the exact argument that you gave, but let's just use the standard baby torture argument once, for example, right? Where it's something like, it is wrong to torture babies for fun. If it's wrong to torture babies for fun, then it's wrong for, I don't know, C, to torture babies for fun, and then the rest follows by modus ponens. But the issue is that if on the supposition that the argument is valid, that there would be an equivocation with respect to the phrase "it is wrong to torture babies for fun," because that phrase specifically, right, expresses, on your view, a certain type of prescription, right, rather than it actually expressing a proposition. And so you could basically utter the second sentence there without even having such a prescription. But you're saying that you can just capture the inference by basically embedding the prescription in the in the premises, but
No,
it
not
would just be
really.
an equivocation. That's what you said. You said we can just capture the inference by saying, if I prescribe, torture for fun is wrong, then I shouldn't torture for fun, or something like that, right?
No, like the idea is like, well, first and foremost, let me just make this clear. I don't think these are premises, right? Because I take premises to contain propositions. Like what I gave weren't propositions. So like, we need to make a distinction between like I prescribe against whether that's a proposition or not. It's not a proposition, right? It's like a performative utterance. So like in speech act theory, we have things are like, performative utterances. Another example that might be more obvious is like, I apologize. When I say I
Inferences are about
apologize,
proposition. Inferences are about propositions.
yeah,
What do you
exactly.
mean
The
you capture the
inference,
inference?
the way that the inference is captured is not through this relationship between propositions, but rather is through the prescription applying in all relevantly similar circumstances, right? So if you want to be
I don't
consistent,
understand. I don't understand. So you're inferring from something non-propositional?
in a sense, right? But like we're using inference in a non-standard way. I'm just saying, how can we get from one thing to another? When I say inference, it's very loosely being used, right? Like when I say, if I prescribe against murder, right? I also have this view that my prescriptions apply in all circumstances are similar to this one, right? Then if there's a really similar circumstance, right, where I pay somebody to murder and like everything else is
Okay,
the
look,
same.
I understand what you're saying, but it doesn't make sense because you agree that the way inferences are understood in like classical logic is that they operate on propositions, right?
Yeah, I already agreed to this. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just kind of, it's, I don't want to say analytic, but it's just kind of true that any given standard inference has to rely on truth preservation. So I don't know what you mean when you say that you're capturing an inference from non-propositional content.
So when I say inference, I'm using the term very loosely for like the second time, right? What I mean when I say inference is like, how are we getting from one thing to another, right? I'm not saying
And
inferences
all you're doing
insofar
is
as
just a semantic detour, not actually.
inferences insofar as there is some relationship between propositions or like propositions. I mean inferences insofar as we have this one thing, right? And like knowing this one thing, how do we get to the other thing? Like the
How
idea
does
is
this
like
get
the
around
last
it? How does
time.
this get around the problem? The way that the problem, with respect to the frigate Geach problem,
So like
that's
presumably
not
if the problem
concept
is
of inference.
if the problem is like how do we understand how people get from one conclusion to another in moral discourse, then I've already answered that question. But if the problem is
No,
like
that's not
how
what
do
that's not what
people
the problem
well
is.
if the problem is being worded in a way where I need to use propositions, if you're saying something like, well, we use inferences in everyday moral talk, how do you explain this if you're a non-propositional semantic person, you're proposing these? I just disagree, right? Because I just disagree that under your definition we use inferences in everyday talk. I think it was like pretty silly.
So it's just a semantical detour, basically. You're not actually addressing the issue. You're just saying that I'm using inferences in a broader way that is basically non-conventional. Why would
Bro,
anybody accept this notion
you're
of inference?
talking to a non-cognitivist, right? And you've asked a non-cognitivist, hey, we use inferences all the time in moral discourse. And what you mean by inferences is the connection between propositions. So you're already telling the non-cognitivist, basically, is what you've told me is, look, when we talk about morals, we use propositions. How do you explain this? Obviously, every non-cognitivist ever is going to disagree with that claim. In the same way, if I came to you and said, hey, man, when I'm having moral discourse, I use non-propositions, I use imperatives, I use these other things. How do you
That's
explain
not
this?
even what the issue. That's not even what the issue is. The issue that I'm saying is that when I say that you're basically doing a semantical detour, what it is that you're just basically using a different, you could say, semantic notion of the term inference in a way that captures a quote inference, but it's not the way that anybody understands what an inference is, except for non-cognitivists. Why would we accept that?
This is obviously troll. Like, if by inference
How
you
am I
mean,
trolling?
if by inference you mean, because I already explained this to you, if by inference you mean a relationship between propositions, obviously I deny that those sorts of inferences are used in moral discourse. So asking me how do I deal with this issue, it's like you saying, how do I deal with this thing, right? And you're defining this thing as something that immediately contradicts what I'm saying. Obviously, I disagree that this is how we use the terms, right? But if by inference you mean, look, we have this one moral statement or this one moral thing, or moral sentence, how do we get from this one moral sentence to the other? Because when we engage in moral discourse, we seem to go from one thing to another. We seem to conclude on certain things and make certain quote-unquote inferences. And I'm saying, yeah, it looks like we're making inferences, but what's actually going on is this universal prescriptivist stuff where we say our prescription should apply in all relevantly similar circumstances, and we identify this other circumstance as relevantly similar, and so we apply the prescription.
You're basically reinterpreting like logical consequences or logical inferences in a way that can be applicable to certain non-propositional content, like, say, for example, commitments or even expressive attitudes, for example. You're basically just reinterpreting it.
If that's how you understood what I was saying, then I mean, I don't know what to tell you.
Is that inaccurate from what that's literally what you said you were doing?
I said, if by inference you mean how do we get from one sentence to another sentence, right? Then yes, I already gave you that answer. If by inference you mean something where propositions stand in relation to other propositions, I don't think that's what we do.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying, do you understand what I mean when I say that you're reinterpreting like what an inference is? Do you understand what I mean when I say that?
If by reinterpreting you mean I'm giving a different account of inference in moral discourse, then yeah, I already agreed to this. Yeah, that's what all.
Okay, so why did you disagree with what I said? That's literally what I just said you did, and you said that's not what you did.
Wait, so okay, this is like really silly. This is what most non-cognitivists do, right? Like if you look at like Simon Blackburn's work or Alan Gibbert's work, all of these non-cognitivists, what they will do, at least most of them at least, if they don't want to become deflationist, is they'll
the only point that I'm making
they'll give an account of how you can connect moral sentences without these strict logical inferences. It's like,
okay, cool. So, okay, why are you saying? Why are you? You've already explained this part.
Okay,
like, all I'm saying here is okay. So all I'm saying, I'm just trying to get clear on whether or not you and I are both on the same page about what exactly it is that you're doing and what you're saying. So you disagreed earlier when I said that you were just basically reinterpreting inferences, and you're reinterpreted in a way that can be applicable to certain like non-propositional content, like for example, commands or prescriptions or something like that. You did. You literally said. You said if that's how you understood, and which is like basically implying that you don't like the way that I formulated the response. Okay, cool. So now that I know that that's what you mean, okay, cool. So you're basically just reinterpreting.
I just didn't disagree with that.
Okay, so then why'd you say if that's how you interpret what I said?
What I disagreed with, I didn't even disagree with anything, to be honest. What I said was that it's pretty silly that you're trying to say I'm taking a semantic detour and word it in that sense, as if I was meant to agree that when we're having moral discourse as a non-cognitivist, we're using.
When I say you're taking a semantic detour, what I mean is that you're basically taking like a certain type of semantical analysis of a term that's different from standard usage of the term, conventional use of the term. You agree that your reinterpretation of inferences is it's far less formalizing logic, right? And it's also far more controversial.
I already said to you, I don't think that's how inferences are used in logic. But if I've already explained my view to you, why would you then?
Wait,
this is
so cool.
What I'm interested in.
Okay, so this is actually cool. So you agree. Like, okay, that's all I mean by semantic.
If all you meant to say,
that's all I meant by semantical detour.
If all you meant to say is that I'm understanding the word inference differently in this context, then I agree. Is there like a response you have?
No, what I'm saying is I'm not just saying that you're understanding it differently. I'm saying that you're taking a much controversial and less formalized understanding of what it means to be an inference. That's all I meant when I said you're taking. Just calm down, okay? That's what I meant when I said you're taking a semantical detour. So now we can further the discussion. I don't know why you're getting heated, right? There's nothing to be heated about. You need to just calm down, okay? So now secondly, right, to the response, you said that you're actually going to respond to the point that I made about the preponderance of psychological studies, basically going against your claim that you're making about the fact that bulk semantic intentions relevantly predict that ordinary normative sentences don't express propositions. You said you were going to respond to that. So what was the response?
Yeah, I just need to see the studies.
I can like try to go find them. Obviously, I don't have these studies on hand, but
you could tell me what
even let's just suppose that these studies.
Yeah, what did the studies say? Well, I don't want to suppose anything to be true, because why would I suppose that studies that go against my position are true? I want to know what they say, though.
Yeah, so basically what these studies show is that let's just suppose for a second that non-cognitivism is true, which is basically, if non-cognitivism is true, then it would entail the prediction that after basically reflecting upon ordinary speaker semantic intentions, that their semantic intentions relevantly favor that moral sentences and judgments don't in fact aim to represent the way things are in the world, right? They actually don't aim to express like propositions. But the issue with that is that the studies directly go against that. Now, what the studies are saying basically is that upon like you could say analysis of ordinary use and moral talk, it seems like people are expressing things that they believe to be true. Like, for example, if somebody says, I believe, right, or that women should have rights, right, in abortion talk, for example, or when somebody says something like rape is wrong, for example, right, it seems like they're expressing something that they actually believe, that they actually think is true, right? That it's not just the case that they're expressing something that's non-propositional.
So like, is the study like too long didn't read? Is the study just saying when you ask most people what they mean when they give more propositions, they report back that they're giving propositions? Is that what you're saying? I mean, like, I don't know why this would be like particularly evidence against my view, because all I'm saying when I'm talking about my view is that these moral sentences are mainly prescriptive, right? Like when we give these moral sentences, we're giving these faux sorts of imperatives. So I mean, like, whether people think that they're giving imperatives or not is like kind of irrelevant to whether they actually are giving imperatives.
Okay, I don't think you understand the objection that I gave, because the reason why it's evidence against your view is basically just based on the preponderance of ordinary English speakers that actually talk about these moral sentences in a way that expresses true propositions, right? If we've conducted, like, by the way, what I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you really caught on to the full analysis of what the study was saying, but it's not just the case that the study predicted that people report that they're expressing something that's truth apt, but it also turned out that their reflexive semantic intuitions, right, dominantly favored that moral sentences do in fact aim to represent the way things actually are, right? Like, for example, when a woman says that, again, she believes that women should have bodily autonomy, right? In abortion arguments, for example, she believes that she's actually expressing like how things actually are, the way the world should be, right? Something that actually corresponds to the world in some way. She doesn't believe that she's just merely expressing an attitude that she has, like, oh, yay, women should have rights. Like, no, she believes that it's actually true that women should have rights, right? Which your specific semantic thesis doesn't capture.
No, I mean, well, first of all, we're talking about like the psychological aspect of non-cognitivism, right? There's going to be a distinction to be made. And I just think like it's expected that if you ask people that are giving, prescriptions, whether they think that the world should conform to those prescriptions, I think they would say, yeah. So like if I say, look, let's all people debate on Discord, right? And I say, okay, well, like, what do you mean by this? And they might say, okay, well, like, one thing that I agree with is like people should follow this prescription. Like, obviously, people are going to follow the prescription they give. So if they understand moral statements to be prescriptive, it doesn't eliminate the fact that they might believe that people should follow these prescriptions. So
how can you have beliefs about something that's non-propositional? I just take a belief. I just take it to be basically analytically entailed from the concept of a belief that would contain a proposition. So in what sense do you have beliefs about prescriptions if you've already agreed that prescriptions are non-propositional?
So, I mean, if the question was how can you have beliefs about things are non-propositional, I don't know what the contradiction is, right? I mean, like, you can have beliefs about anything, whether they exist or not, whether they're propositional or not.
No, so obviously, so when you say that they have a belief about the prescription, is that to say, what does that sentence mean?
Like, they can say like something like, I believe this prescription is dog shit or something. It's like the subject of the subject of the belief is the prescription, right? So they can have a belief about a prescription. I'm not even sure what you're raising now, to be honest. I mean,
okay, so you say when you say they have a belief about the prescription, I'm not raising anything currently. I'm just trying to understand what exactly you mean when you say that they believe that they have the prescription, and you think that in virtue of that it satisfies basically like how ordinary language, or excuse me, rather captures the propositional nature, it seems like, of ordinary semantic intention. So you're just saying that they have a belief about the prescription rather than just them having, like, you could say, a belief about the moral proposition.
like it sounded like the study you gave were people saying, look, I think that when I give these moral sentences, I'm intending to say the world should be this way. But I'm saying when I give prescriptions, I also intend for the world to conform to my prescription. So the data isn't like particularly unexpected under my view.
Okay, so so you understand that there's a sort of classification that we can make about, you could say, intentional mental states and non-intentional mental states, right? So let's suppose for a second that on the analysis that they can be classified as either cognitive, in which case they would be belief-like, or non-cognitive, in which case they would be desire-like. You take it that you could say, given the taxonomy of intentional mental states, that the type of non-cognitivism that you're proposing falls under the category of non-intentional mental states, or no?
I mean, look, I mean, I'm slightly unclear because I mean, I'm not sure if I would say a prescription itself represents. I mean, okay, maybe I could say something like a prescription expresses a cognitive mental state or something. I mean, I'm not even sure.
Expresses. Okay, wait. So that wasn't really the question. Was if you understand the distinction between the classification of an intentional mental state and a non-intentional mental state.
Yeah, like presumably
like intentional mental states are usually taken to be like cognitive, like they're
yeah, exactly. And then cognitive is like desires and stuff, right? Like if I have like
non-cognitive would be desire like, right?
No, I said cognitive. And there's like desires and stuff.
You take it that desires are cognitive?
No, cognitive.
Oh, you said cognitive. Okay, sorry, I couldn't tell because your accent, but okay, yeah. So, but you would agree. So the question that I was asking you then was whether or not you take the view that prescriptions themselves as a certain type of mental content fall under the category of non-intentional mental states.
I think it's a category error. I don't know if I'd say prescriptions fall under any sort of mental state.
So prescriptions are just not any kind of mental state?
No, maybe they express mental states. And if that's what you're asking me, I think they lean under expressing desire-like non-cognitive mental states, probably.
Okay, so they fall under a non-intentional mental state where they're basically non-cognitive in character, okay? Now, I just take it that it's basically analytically entailed from the concept of what a cognitive state is that it would be a type of mental state where it aims to correctly represent the way the world is, right? And so it's basically going to have a sort of mind-to-world relation where I also take the same type of analytic entailment from the concept of non-cognitive mental states where they're actually just thought of to basically have a world-to-mind relation, right? In which case, they wouldn't be the sort of things that aim to represent the way the world are or have any type of representational mental function, right? And so given these two concepts, it basically is unintelligible to me when you say that you can basically capture an inference, the first thing that you said. The second thing that you said was that not only can you capture an inference, but you can actually just basically account for folk ordinary semantic intentions by basically having them have beliefs about the prescriptions. But by prescriptions, you're basically describing a non-intentional mental category, right? In which case, I don't take it that those types of mental mental facts, you could say, even fall under the category of things that can be propositional, right? In the way that I understand it, which is why I don't understand what your view is saying.
Yeah, I mean, like the first thing is, I mean, I'm not even sure if these questions, I mean, okay, like for the first thing, let's talk about the inference like one more time. I'll just substitute I prescribe if something else is like similar. Like just like if I do, so if I do X, then I do Y, right? And then you might think, okay, well, why is that true? And you might have something in the background that's just like, you know, X and Y are like relevantly similar. It's like, if you do X, then do Y too, right? Or something. Like in the same way, Hare would understand if I prescribe against X, then I prescribe against Y to be something that's true if under your universal prescriptivism, X and Y are relevantly similar scenarios. It's like murdering, paying someone to murder, I don't know, like putting a bounty on somebody so that they can be murdered or something. These are all things that are relevantly similar. And so if you do one, do the other too. If you prescribe against one, prescribe against the other. But the important thing is that prescribing against is a performative utterance. And so it's similar to things like, I apologize. When I say I apologize, I'm not saying like, I'm not describing the world as a world where I apologize. Perhaps that's like an implication. But when I say I apologize, that's me saying something that I'm doing actively. I'm doing something, and that doing is the apology. I'm apologizing by that phrase. And so I think I've really like sufficiently explained the inference stuff. But like for the psychology stuff, I mean, it sounded like what you were saying in your study was like when you ask people what they mean when they give these sorts of moral things or something like that, maybe they intend to describe the world or something. And I think like I disagree with that. If that's what the study says, then obviously what I said doesn't track. But if what you are saying by the study is something like people have these moral, sorts of beliefs that, people should act this way or people should act that way, I think it's expected under the prescriptivist view. So like if you have the studies where you can like quote from the study, then I could like respond more accurately.
I'm not really, so I don't think you really I think you just kind of basically repeated the same stuff that you said previously about how it's the case that your version of expressivism, or you could say non-cognitivism, best captures those instances or those issues. But that wasn't really the point. The point that I was saying was basically how it's the case that if prescriptions, right, as a certain type of mental fact fall under the non-intentional camp of mental facts, then I don't even take it, or rather, it's not even intelligible to me to say that that prescriptions can capture those things, because it's just literally analytically entailed from the very concept of non-cognitive mental states that they wouldn't be the types of things that have a mind-to-world relation, rather a world-to-mind relation, right? And so and then with the stuff that I said about the psychological studies previously, right? The issue that I think maybe you failed to capture, or rather you failed to understand, was that because you said previously that you could just say that they have beliefs about prescriptions, right? But that's the very, like, you could say, trivial prediction under a non-cognitivist hypothesis, right? Is that if you're assuming an internalist approach of normative sentences, then your non-cognitivist empirical predictions would be trivial, right? It just basically implies that ordinary speakers are in some sense disposed to apply moral sentences, right? Or apply terms to a kind of sentence that doesn't actually aim to represent the way that things actually are, right? But the issue with this is that the thing that matters for moral semantics, right, is precisely what the speaker's reflexive intuitions are. And the reflexive intuitions basically relevantly predict that ordinary normative sentences would be expressed in propositions, right? Which is something that your view can't account for. Instead, it makes a basic, trivial, empirical prediction, right? I take it that moral sentences are truth apt. And the reason why is because they intend to express how things are, right? Like, what is the case with regard to, you could say, like, even if you're like a moral realist, what is the case with regard to like an objective world? Or if you're like a subjectivist, what's the case with regard to, you could say, the agent's like internal intuitions or something like this? And it's also the case that those sentences are either going to be true or false, right? So that's what the issue is, but I'm not really sure if you're understanding, but I have to leave in like a couple minutes, so you can give like your final response and I'll give my final response. Did he leave, by the way? Oh, he's back.
Yeah, my fault. I got sniped. I'm gonna respond.
Did you hear everything that I said?
Yeah. I mean, look,
Okay,
the first
cool.
thing, the like mental state stuff. I mean, like I already said, I don't think it's proper to say that prescriptions or any sort of like semantic sentence type is a mental state. But if what you mean by that is like they express certain mental states, I don't know what the issue is with saying that prescriptions or any other sort of sentence type can express multiple different mental states. And I kind of can refer to the example I gave initially. If I'm waiting for my friend to come outside because we want to go, like, I don't know, like Discord debate or something, and he's been inside for a long time, and I say something like, "Are you coming out anytime soon?" or something, and that's like obviously a question. That could express, a non-cognitive mental state that expresses, me requesting to know if he's coming out, like a desire to know something, and it could also express this imperative of me telling him to like hurry up, right? So you can express both of these things, and those are obviously like two different mental states. Or you could have like something that expresses both a propositional and a non-propositional mental state. As long as they refer to different things, there would be no issue with that, right? Because of course there are different sorts of mental states, there are different types of mental states, but there wouldn't be a contradiction unless they refer to the same thing. So if they're in the same sense, but you could obviously have them in different senses. Like I could tell someone to sit down, and I could also intend to describe this seat as a seat that's good to sit down on. So I could like be gesturing towards the seat and say, "Sit down," and also be trying to describe this seat as like a seat that's good to sit down on to this person I'm trying to speak to. So I mean, I'm not really clear on the first thing, and the second thing with the study is, and the triviality stuff. I mean, building on what I just said before, you can be a prescriptivist and still believe that what you're giving prescriptions for is also in some sense descriptive. It's like referred to like a large majority of theists across the world are like divine command theorists, and they believe in like divine law. Like when they give like the 10 Commandments or something, right? They may say something like, follow the 10 Commandments, and they may also be describing the world as a world in which the 10 Commandments are real, solid, something that you know, always in your interest to, follow and, do right by, etc., etc. So you can also have these descriptive intuitions paired with these prescriptive intuitions. And so, yeah, I mean, that's probably like a short response to what was being said. I mean, I don't think there's anything else to say.
Yeah, so I'm not really sure if you're understanding you could say response that I'm giving here. It seems like you just basically keep giving these basically roundabout ways to kind of describe something that seems like a cognitive-like state, but basically not want to call it a cognitive-like state. But the thing that I'm proposing here is that if we, given the very taxonomy of intentional mental states, right, it's going to be the case that if you're a non-cognitivist about moral sentences, that you take the view that moral sentences don't aim to express the way things actually are, right? And so it's going to be an entailment on that view that any given moral sentence, right, or any given moral judgment, you disagree with. Okay, I'm just going to finish what I'll say anyways, because this is the closest statement, but that moral sentences don't aim to express like the way things actually are. That's just literally from the concept of what a non-intentional mental state is. A non-intentional mental state is a type of mental state that does not aim to represent the way things actually are, right? It has a world to mind relation, not a mind to world relation. That's just literally what it means to be a non-intentional mental fact, right? But the issue is that the view can't account, right? His view cannot account for, you could say, hyper intentional relation between those non-intentional mental facts and you could say like the normative facts, right? Now I understand my interlocutor says that he doesn't use terms like normative facts because normative facts presuppose, you could say, in some sense, something that's cognitive like, but of course he rejects that, so he's not even going to say normative facts are a thing, right? He's going to say that relevant, like whenever we're talking about morality, we're just talking about like prescriptions or these types of expressions of attitudes that we have or something like that. But even if you were to reduce all the morality stuff to just like the descriptive facts, right? In your case, descriptive non-intentional mental types, I don't even see how you would be able to basically ground the hyper-intentional relation between those non-intentional mental facts and you could say the normative facts, right? Which is precisely what morality is about, right? There's a certain type of relation between normative facts and you could say the hyper-intentionality of, you could say the descriptive facts, right? Unless he just straightforwardly rejects the distinction between those two things, but maybe that's a discussion for another day. So I'll just leave it at that. I have to get ready to leave soon. So if you have anything left, you can say that and then we'll just call it there.
No problem. Look, so my conclusion is pretty simple. We're talking about abortion. I gave some like relative identity stuff, and then he asked me about some like normative facts, and I told him, I mean, like, how are you understanding fact? Because when I think of a fact, I think of something that's true. Like, I don't think that any moral statements are true. So I just would disagree. Like, if we're talking about normativity relative to our moral domain, there would be any sorts of normative facts that are relevant to the situation. And then we started talking about non-cognitivism. He gave me two responses. The first response was the free gauge problem. And like, I don't think the free gauge problem works against prescriptivist views. I think it's notorious for it working against emotivist views. And so I just gave like the typical response, given universal prescriptivism and like a desire for consistency. If I do one thing, if I prohibit one thing, I also should prohibit, or I also do prohibit this other thing, right? And this other thing is relevantly similar to the other thing that I prohibited. So if I prohibit eating in class, perhaps I also prohibit drinking in class, because eating in class and drinking in class are like relevantly similar. And like the idea is like, given this thing in the background that we have, which is the idea that if I prohibit one thing, I should also prohibit the other thing because they're, relevantly similar situations. We can just apply that background belief to all of these cases and say, well, one thing is relevantly similar to the other. And so I do prohibit this thing. Let me also prohibit this other thing. And so we capture the connection between moral sentences without having to appeal to propositions or relationships between propositions. And so as long as they're related, there aren't propositions, which they're not. I think I already dispatched the free gauge problem. And then we started speaking about the psychology stuff, like, I had these psychological studies that show that most people report descriptivist views or something. I think like there needs to be something that's cleared up quickly. I already said that there's a distinction between a semantic non-cognitivist and a psychological non-cognitivist. I already said like maybe you intend to describe the world in some way or something along those lines. But that doesn't mean that you're representing the world also in this way as well. So like that's the distinction. I already said to him, these guys can have these descriptivist intuitions and also be prescriptivists, right? Like I'm a prescriptivist and I also have descriptivist intuitions. A lot of Christians and a lot of Muslims around the world are divine command theorists. If they say something like, or like if a Christian, for example, refers to the 10 Commandments and they say, look, follow the 10 Commandments, they may also be describing the world as a world where the 10 Commandments are divinely inspired from God, something that, are real, objective, perfect, etc., etc. These are like implications that might be there. So I might be giving a prescription and also simultaneously describing some other feature as well. There's no real issue with that under my view, because what I'm saying is that the moral statements are prescriptive and they do not have representational truth conditions specifically. So, I mean, that was it. He also said something about prescriptions falling under mental states that are non-cognitive, but I think there's like no issue with them being both. So a prescription might express both cognitive and non-cognitive mental states in the same way that a question might express both an imperative as well as an interrogative. I might be saying something like, are you done yet? To both, express a desire that, I want to know if the person's done. And also tell the guy to hurry up. Right, so I could be doing both of those things, and I think the same applies for propositions and non-propositions. I don't think there's like a relevant difference there. And so I don't really think any, powerful responses were given to my non-cognitive, view. And so I think we just wrapped up there, to be honest.
Yeah, I guess I can just give like one final response, because it seems like my opponent is still under the assumption that he successfully, like he said, dispatched the Frege-Geach problem. But the way that he tries to do that is by basically a certain type of view of prescriptivism known as universal prescriptivism, which is basically the view that moral statements are prescriptions or imperatives of some sort. But the way that they get around, traditional embedded problems is that these imperatives, right, that it's going to be the case that those things have certain types of properties precisely because they're universalizable, right? Hence why he gives these examples like, about the imperative sentences and how they can actually be accurately captured under, can accurately capture, you could say, the reflexive intuitions that we have about normative sentences expressed in propositions, right? But the reason why that fails, right, is not only in virtue of, you could say, the preponderance of psychological studies that basically show that it is the case that folk semantic intuitions largely and relevantly overly predict that ordinary moral sentences are in fact expressed in propositions. But another issue on his view is that it's not the case that imperatives can actually, you could say, in some sense, like transmit like logical force, right? The reason why is because logic itself is literally the thing that governs, in some sense, the very structure of universal principles themselves, right? And so he's going to have certain issues, like even still, like with the embedding problems, like it's not clear to me how prescriptivism clearly explains away how it is the case that imperatives work in embedded contexts. It seems like he attempted to give like a sort of response, but the response was just really unclear to me. I really don't see any difference, like any large difference between saying that you should sit down and sit down, right? It seems like those two things are both expressing propositions, and it seems like they're both about a certain type of intentional mental state. I don't really see any reason to accept that one would be, you could say, in some sense, a non-intentional mental state, and the other one would. And it's also the case that like literally logic itself requires like truth functional connectives, right? In order for us to even make inferences about premises or propositions. But, in his case, basically what he's attempting to do with universal prescriptivism is get away from the truth functional connectives and basically use other things like negation or basically conditionalizing, right, the imperatives. But the issue is that it's really unclear how conditionality even functions like on imperatives at all. And then if we accept his version, or you could say his concept of validity, it's basically going to be like vague, right? It's not really going to be clear what precisely makes an argument valid. If we accept that, there are no premises that are truth apt and, right, like what would it even mean on that view to say that, a prescriptive argument is valid, right? The term valid just becomes basically really vague. So yeah, again, my opponent attempted to give responses to each and every one of these problems, but the answers were just really unclear to me. It kind of seemed like a really weak semantic detour to get around what the actual issues were.
All right, guys. So for my final response, you feel me? for my final, I mean, look, there's no much more to say. I mean, you feel me? The reason why, the conditional hold is because of universal prescriptivist stuff. Like, look, if I'm a racist, let's say I'm a racist, and I particularly don't like black people, right? So I'm like a racist, I'm in like Connecticut or something, right? And let's say like there are like some Indians as well, right? And I believe like black skin, dark skin, like Indian skin are like sufficiently similar. Then I may also be, racist to Indians too, right? Because I might have this belief in the background that, I should apply my racism to all similar circumstances. It's like, even if there's like an albino or like a mixed race kid, I should be racist to these guys too, because like they're sufficiently similar to the other people or something. And so like, that's the same thing with the universal prescriptivists. They're going to say, I have something in my background, i.e. universal prescriptivism, which is the idea that if I have one prescription, I should apply it, or I will apply it to all other circumstances that are similar to it. And so given this belief in the background, if I prescribe against one, I prescribe against the other, that's just going to be essentially true, given it's like a subset, I guess, of universal prescriptivism. So I mean, I'm not really sure what to say there. So it's just the belief about what you prescribe and how what you prescribe in one case affects what you should prescribe in other cases. And like it obviously, captures what everybody, wants to say, obviously captures those things. I just want to give a quick shout out to, my people on the stage. We've got Hyde Cake Moth, Shenra, Mercury, Eric, Avery, Muti, Vale, B, Moxie.
All right, since all of you guys, the audience, are being dickheads, I need you to